music we're listening to is a piece called Barber's Adagio, and it's one of those pieces that has a way of describing things that we can't really express in words. And with that, this is my review of the Liberal Party of Australia. The Liberal Party are one of our 54 parties. Actually, to be corrected, this review isn't just about the Liberal Party. This is about four parties. This is about the National Party of Australia, the Country Liberals, and the Liberal National Party. And all of those groups put together form a formal agreement or a formal alliance called the Coalition. The parties themselves are almost identical in policy and stature and what they stand for. That said, you won't find all four of those parties in every state. They vary from state to state. And just thinking about the coalition, the term coalition has essentially come to stand for or become synonymous with Liberal Party. That's because the Liberal Party probably forms about 85% of the coalition. The National Party is probably another 10%. And then the Country Liberals and the Liberal National Party probably about 2.5% each. So it's largely the Liberal Party, which is most synonymous with coalition, although it does include those other parties. I haven't done reviews of those other three because the policies are basically identical. There are very, very minor differences between them. Okay, so let's talk about Liberal. Okay, now Liberal Party is a big party, and in fact, I think it's the biggest party in Australia. They have a big history. They have had, I think, 13 out of the 27 prime ministers. They've had more time in charge of the country than any other party. So they've held office with those 13 prime ministers more than anyone else. They're a huge influence in Australian politics. They're traditionally one half of Australia's if you were to use the very crude traditional analogy, they're one half of Australia's politics. Liberal on the left and Liberal on the right, Labor on the left. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, and I wouldn't be doing all of these reviews if I didn't feel very strongly that there's a lot more to politics than two sides in this country. So the Liberal Party have traditionally represented the socially conservative side of the country. They are socially conservative. They economically are supporters of free trade, which could also be called pro-competition. It's an alternative to fair trade. And look, it's a big party. They have certain divisions, which we call factions in there. But probably not as prevalent. The factions are probably not as prevalent as they are in the Labor Party. Australia is coming off the back of a 10-year period with John Howard as the Prime Minister, and I believe that his tenure as Prime Minister ended in 2007, and we've had the Labor Party have been in power since then. But between, I think, 97 and 2007, we had 10 years of John Howard's Liberal Party running the country. So we know a fair bit about what to expect. Very little changed in that 10 years, and we do know a thing or two about what the Liberals have in store. The current leader of the Liberal Party, as you probably know, is Tony Abbott. And at the time of recording, he's very much the favourite to become the next Prime Minister of Australia. Tony Abbott isn't liked by a lot of people in cities, but he is liked by a lot of people in countries. However, I need to point out that the position of the Liberal Party is not solely, by any means, a vehicle for the expression of Tony Abbott's views. There are many other people in the Liberal Party, and there are many powerful figures and many people who express similar opinion. So I don't think it's fair should Tony Abbott take on office, I don't think it would be correct to make, I guess, for making Tony Abbott a scapegoat. I don't believe that's correct. Um, there are many other people, again, people like Brendan Nelson, Joe Hockey, Peter Garrett, Malcolm Turnbull. Uh, there's a lot more than that. But I guess the party's views are, it's a collaborative effort. I guess another way of saying that is I used to, for a long time, think that the John Howard government's decisions were the decisions of John Howard. And then when Brendan Nelson led the party, I used to think that Brendan Nelson always had a political agenda and his decisions were because of Brendan Nelson's. And then I thought that maybe Malcolm Turnbull was the one who made certain decisions happen in the Liberal Party. It's not one or the other. It's a group effort. Just a little more on Tony Abbott. So he is favoured to become not he's sorry he's favoured to become our Prime Minister, which could happen this time next week. Now, Tony Abbott has led a very successful campaign this election, I must admit. The Liberal Party, the one thing that they do very, very, very well is they know politics and they know how to play the game. Um, the vast majority, if not all, of the Liberal Party major politicians, well, they've been doing it all their life and they know the ins and the outs and the tricks of the trade. A lot of them come from a background of being lawyers. That often happens in politics. But there isn't a lot of diversity in terms of people who have found their paths into the Liberal Party. Okay, let's talk about what they stand for. So again, Tony Abbott has led this campaign. It's been very successful for him, and at the same time, it's been a particularly it's a campaign that has been under some scrutiny. Tony Abbott has managed uh, to become a very prominent face in the Australian public, and to somehow make his views very clear and yet very vague at the same time. Um, we still don't know. Again, less than a week out of the election, we still don't know what. We still don't know a lot about the costings of the Liberal Party policies. We don't know a lot about what the Liberal, well, for example, the Liberal Party, they don't have an economic policy. I found that really interesting going through their list. Even for the Liberal Party, who have been traditionally socially conservative, and traditionally in favour of big business and whatnot, but they don't have an actual policy dedicated to their theories and their vision for economics in the country. And I felt that to be really different. They do have a policy that talks about, quote, moving Australia to a digital economy, end quote. And I read through that, and it talks a lot about infrastructure and ICT, and it talks about moving government services to cloud-based systems and making use of technology to make government more efficient. But it did not really talk about economy, trade agreements, stock markets, interest rates, etc., which I thought was quite unusual for the Liberal Party. Now, I've been talking already for a little while about them and I haven't really started to talk about what they stand for. I'll try and be succinct here. Okay, so the Liberal Party haven't changed a lot in the past 20 years. They've changed a little bit, but their policies still stand by what they believe in. They believe in, one of their strongest areas that they believe in is defence. They are very for the strengthening of defence. They would like a much stronger defence in the country. And all elements of defence. They would like They would like more tax benefits for people working in defence, better super for them. They want to buy a lot of defence equipment. They have specifically mentioned submarines and Joint Strike Fighter pilots and drones, and um, they they've also incidentally mentioned um, that Australians spend 6 times as much on social welfare and security payments currently than they do on defence. So defence is a big thing for them. They also, as an aside, they're very for the pro-veterans affairs. They're very much for supporting people that are returned servicemen. Um, as an aside to their defence policies, Australia's traditional allies in foreign policy is very important to the Liberal Party. They're very interested in supporting uh, our our current official allegiances and our traditional allegiances in wartime and in international relations is a diplomatic way of saying it. They're very much for supporting our relationship in particular with the United States and also with the United Kingdom. To a lesser extent, they are interested in some other countries too, of course. France is one, China is another. Um, they they're very interested in traditional foreign policy. Um, okay, now what else? They're very much for. They have a policy on the aviation industry. Sorry, I'll say that again. The aviation industry. Bit of diction. They in their aviation policy, they have an aviation policy. They mention that they want to abolish the carbon tax because that uh, apparently is causing unnecessary cost in the aviation industry. They want to support firebombing and aerial agriculture, and they want to um, yeah, agriculture in itself there is something else that the Liberal Party is very much interested in. They are very for economic growth in Tasmania. They've mentioned that they would like to see uh, more growth in Tasmania, more forestry and more farming. They do support big agriculture, and by big agriculture I mean agribusiness, supporting the corporate side of agriculture, you could say. Um, okay, the Liberal Party have mentioned with very careful wording that there will be no education cuts. So, quote, no education cuts, end quote, in schooling. At the same time, they have mentioned that they have a desire to, I guess, palm off or handball or hand over responsibility of a lot of educational costings and school costings to state governments. And state governments, liberal state governments, of which most of our state governments are, have a history of cutting and slashing education. Um, they can and they have and they will. Um, the Liberal government are not fans of welfare. They dislike welfare. They see it as a cost that Australia uh, doesn't need to be frivolous with. Um, they they also really like transport. That's another thing that they really like. And by transport, I mean private transport, road infrastructure. They do not they do not like public transport, I guess you could say. They don't, well, at least you could say they don't have a history of investing in public transport. They do have a history of making cuts in public transport. But they do have a history of building roads, and they do like road infrastructure. Um, what else? They like supporting the fisheries industry. They like supporting seniors. I must admit, one policy they do have, and they certainly this was reminiscent of the Howard government, is they are very interested in, well, not very interested, but they're somewhat interested in mental health, which was quite a surprise. But one thing that the Howard government was responsible for, and they saw this through, was um, the putting in place of a national mental health service called Code Blue. Now, Code Blue did come under and continues to come under some scrutiny for being for having different for having the ability to offer different levels of service to different mental health problems. It's not, by some people's standards, an all-inclusive mental health service, and there have been cases where people have um, felt discriminated against because Code Blue hasn't supported their particular mental condition. There haven't been people trained to support all areas of mental health. So in terms of health with the Liberals, they do have some interest in mental health. They do have some interest in seniors and veterans affairs. They haven't mentioned any support for hospitals. And again, they haven't mentioned an economic policy, and that's kind of scary because when a party as big and, I guess, as powerful as the Liberal Party doesn't indicate how they want to spend their money, our money, then as taxpayers, then it makes one feel weary. But nevertheless, the Liberal Party don't have a policy on climate change. It's just not on the webpage. Who knows what they stand for? Time will tell. But given that they don't support it, I don't know. You can only judge a party on what they say. You can't judge them on what they don't say, really. Sorry, I need to readjust because I'm going. My foot's gone to sleep. Okay. What else? Bear with me. They support mining. That's a really big part of the Liberal Party. They are really pro big business. Their approach to running the country has often been synonymous with supporting big business at whatever cost. They like foreign investment, and they like mining is a big part of that. The Liberal government are quick to tout their economic prowess. It is worth mentioning that, as a very crude and quick analysis, one could say that the Labor Party, our current government under Kevin Rudd and Wayne's former Treasurer Wayne Swan, basically beat them at their own game. Our economy with Labor is arguably the best in the world, and it was never to that level, although it wasn't terrible. It was not really ever as strong as what it currently is with the Labor government. That does need to be said. I've said a lot on Liberal. The only other point I wanted to make, and this is very important, this is probably the most important point I'm going to make in any of my videos, is about the about media ownership and the National Broadband Network. So let's be brief. Okay, so in Australia we have a company called Foxtel, and they are owned by a parent company called News Limited, and that's owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch owns most of the television stations and newspapers and most of the radio stations in the country. He's a media owner. We have another big media owner whose name is... Why have I gone blank? John Fairfax, of course. Fairfax and Murdoch own most of Australia's media. It's very much a duopoly. It's much more of a duopoly than the US, much more of a monopoly than Europe. Rupert Murdoch is a very rich and very powerful man. I had the experience. I've had quite a lot of experience in the past few weeks of spending time in rural Australia, and the political demographic out there is incredibly different to what I found in capital cities. And it's a lot more conservative. And as a generalisation, people in the country seem to have less access to diverse media. And they seem to be big consumers of traditional media, like what I mentioned: commercial radio, newspapers, commercial television, of course. And the National Broadband Network is an initiative by the Rudd government, the Labor government, who are currently in power, to provide fibre broadband to everyone's house in Australia. It's a huge undertaking. It's massive. Australia's a big place, but we've also lagged behind in internet speeds, downloads and uploads for a very long time. We're currently ranked about 50th in terms of upload speeds in the world, and I think our download rate is somewhat similar, but for a country as developed as Australia, that's really poor. Kevin Rudd has taken very considerable steps to improve and improve in a succinct and refined way Australia's internet access. Now, all this comes together when you think about Foxtel. Now, Foxtel is a pay TV company, and it is Rupert Murdoch's most profitable way of making money in Australia. The NBN project is basically going to put Foxtel out of business. It's another means of physically running cable to people's houses, and I would speculate, although I'm not certain on this, that it would be a very small step to introduce a lot of competitors to Foxtel's current monopoly in the pay TV industry in Australia. So Rupert Murdoch is doing everything he can in his power to stop the NBN project happening. Everything, and that includes blatant slandering of the Rudd government at all costs in all newspapers, in all television stations that he owns, and all the radio stations as well. It's a smear campaign in its most literal sense. It's every bit in his interest. I've gone on for this for a while, I know, but it's very much in Rupert Murdoch, who is touted as the most powerful man in Australia, to overthrow, I guess, the Rudd government in order to circumvent the NBN project, and that involves promoting Tony Abbott, which involves denouncing Kevin Rudd. And we have seen pictures of Kevin Rudd in Nazi costumes on front pages of newspaper. We've seen him compared to Kim Jong-il, the North Korean communist leader. And it's basically been a battering ram. If people try and speak out against this, they will be smeared, often with artificial lies or fabricated lies, and that happens pretty much overnight if you get on Murdoch's bad side. So Kevin Rudd has an uphill battle, and that is why I believe that there's only really two people in the country that really want Tony Abbott to be PM, and that's Tony Abbott and Rupert Murdoch. To a lesser extent, John Fairfax, because he's still a media owner. So even if you watch Channel 10, which is owned by Fairfax, even if you read The Age, Melbourne newspaper, as opposed to the Herald Sun, the mass media as a whole are very much almost de facto members of the Liberal Party. It's very disappointing, and it's very unfortunate that Australia doesn't have adequate legislation really to stop this from happening, and is in a position due to media's massive influence where it's very hard to change these things. All right, that makes me sad. But by the same token, the Liberal Party are not the most. They're certainly not the most right wing, and they're not the most conservative party we have. So if you look at other political parties that we have, like One Nation, for example, others come to mind as well, like Rise Up Australia, Uniting Australia Party, certainly Australia First Party. There are other political parties that are more conservative than the Liberals. And like I said, the Liberal parties, they are good at a couple of things. They're very good at a couple of things. And that's probably where Australia is going to be for the next few years. The other thing I wanted to remind people at this point is that politics don't start and end at elections. And a really, I found to be a really prominent, a very wise MP, who I won't name, said very recently that there is no left side and right side to a good idea in politics. So there are ways through, and I strongly believe that that with common sense and reasoning, Australia can continue to be a really great country. Labor are probably going to be outed in 5 days' time. We'll probably have Tony Abbott's vague vague policies, lack of economic policy, and very mediated political campaign is likely to become a success. Um, but like I say, it's all relative, and if it were One Nation or one of the other more conservative parties, then we would certainly have a much more conservative government. And the Liberal Party have certainly led us before. They're likely to do it again, and um, yeah, we could be worse off. Could be a lot worse off. It is a lucky country. Our standard of living here is excellent. Um, we have a lot of great things going with this country in terms of obviously multiculturalism, and culture is pretty good, and um, yeah, obviously our economic position, and the things could be a whole lot worse. Um, so that's all I have to say on Tony Abbott and the Labor Party and the coalition. If you want to find out more, please find links to the coalition, to the Liberal Party, to their Wikipedia pages. They're all in the description of this video. And if you liked it, feel free to click on like, and feel free to click on share. And I'll see you at my next party review. Thank you.